professor at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and I basically work in education. I do education research and teaching.
I thought I'll get this discussion on assessment in the broader social context going with a study which I have recently been involved with and completing one part of. This was a study which we initiated about a year and a half ago, quite concerned about an approach to quality of schools which took a very learning outcome assessment oriented approach to looking at so it was either looking at measurement of inputs or it was looking at measurement of pupil outcomes. And there were very few studies that we knew of which tried to make sense of the school as an institutional space which is responsible for producing quality education. So we tried to spend some time trying to understand how we wanted to operationalize this idea of quality of school education for ourselves. And we then initiated an exploratory study to try to map the quality question onto schools. The quality question and the quality debate in India has been deeply linked with the question of whether low profit, low fee paying private schools can provide quality education to the poor. That is, do we have cost effective solutions to providing quality? And we felt that that entire research was actually had not actually articulated what it meant by quality education. So there was an assumption that infrastructure counts and our outcome results can help us account for quality in school. And we felt that until we understand what is going on in school and as educators try to map the space of the school and visualize it from the point of view of quality, as articulated especially by J.P. Nayak and Christopher Winch, we would not actually be able to come up with a comment on quality from an educationally defensible standpoint. So we had a very exploratory tool which we took into 3 regions in this country, and we actually attempted to map every single school within a certain urban geographical delimitation using the same instrument. The study is a complex one in which we have actually through the process reflected on many dimensions of school education, but I thought I will today focus on one dimension which I felt is of relevance to this group, which is the dimension of the classroom cultures and what I will be calling pedagogic regimes. This data that I'm going to present to you and speak about briefly comes from the city of Hyderabad, where we chose one educational mandal. It had a total of 85 schools in it, and we mapped every one of those schools using this instrument. When I say school, we counted every type of school which existed there, including the recognized and the unrecognized, the government, the primary school, high school, composite schools, madrasa schools, and even non-formal education centers which were effectively running as schools. So the number 85 represents all the type of schools that existed in that domain. It was actually very difficult for us to figure out what was the clientele bracket that the school catered to, because actually school fee is something very difficult to put your finger on in a private institution. There are many types of fee, hidden and explicit. And so if we had to find out, have an understanding of who goes where, we felt that it was difficult for us to capture the information on fee. Instead, we got the school to tell us about the occupational profiles of the parents who send their children to that school. And some of the analysis that I want to show you today was an attempt for us to correlate the clientele groups and the types of schools. So before I go into speaking about pedagogic regimes, which I want to make the focus of the small set of ideas that I want to articulate, let me just tell you a little bit about the types of schools that existed. I want to just focus a little bit on this particular slide. Group 1 represents occupational types such as bank officer type of employment or high-level government employment or a software engineer. Group 2 are business people. Group 3 represents teachers or people working in the private sector at the clerical position. Group 4 represents people who have irregular employment. They may work as a shop assistant or they may be vegetable vendors. They may have various forms of they may even be daily wage earners. And group 5 represents scavengers, rag pickers and children of people following those kinds of occupations. what we found in the Mandal area is that the schools were remarkably homogeneous in terms of their clientele. And there were only very few schools which had clientele cutting across all a range of occupational types of parents, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3 and 4. This school happened to be a special school. Another interesting finding was that you might think that group 5 children mainly went to government schools. Well, actually, group 5 children mainly went to charitable institutions, schools run by charitable institutions. Even the government schools were not catering to them. The poorest of the poor were really being attended to by schools run by religious minority groups, which were willing to enable children from extremely difficult circumstances to participate in those schools. I want to move on to the question of pedagogic regimes. And you would have noticed by my intense questions in the last session that I have deep views about this whole matter. Yeah. Pedagogy is actually, I prefer the notion of pedagogy to the idea of teaching and learning, because pedagogy, as it has been used in the literature, draws our attention to the fact that there is much more to what teachers do than what appears in the classroom. And teachers' work is best understood as that teaching needs to be understood along with the theories, beliefs, policies, and controversies that inform and shape it. So, our study actually drew attention to the fact that if we want to understand what teachers do, in order to describe what teachers do, we have to take a much more complex approach to the description, rather than just thinking that we will go into the classroom, sit and observe what teachers do, and have something to say about the quality of teaching which goes on there. Then there were different types of teaching that went on in the classroom. There were certain classrooms in which the teaching was massified. By massified, I mean that teachers are not connecting with individual children. They probably don't know individual children's names, and the class proceeds in a very massified way. Certain other classrooms in which the teaching relationship is individuated, but it is not individualized. So you can have a lot of intense assessment going on, and the teacher knows the grade of every child, but every child does not emerge in that classroom as a distinctive individual, although you get individuated in the process of the pedagogy practice. A feature which we felt was very central to understanding Indian classrooms was the method of learning, because I feel very strongly that in India, pedagogy is not only defined by the teaching, but the teacher also has the onus to make sure that the child learns. So you will find that a lot of time in the classroom goes on the exercise of revision, which is something which we never factor in as observers and researchers of classroom. We look at teaching, but this is not actually teaching to teach something new. It is to make sure the child has learnt. And the last is that I felt that schools were also very distinctive from each other in terms of disciplinary cultures that they cultivated in the school. So certain schools would have explicit corporal, physical kind of disciplinary cultures. Certain other schools were more rational in their approach, in the sense that they expected children to internalize a certain expectation, willingness to meet norms and expectations of teachers and fall into that practice through reason. And certain other schools that use psychological taunts and so on in order to make sure the children came into line. But this combination of the method of learning and the disciplinary culture, I feel, are two features which are very striking of Indian classrooms. And I also believe that they are closely connected with what I'm going to call an examination or assessment culture. Krishna Kumar had spoken about a textbook culture, but probably sitting inside that and even deeper than that is this obsession to be examined and assessed and evaluated. Now, you might say that, okay, so every school that we went to, wherever we got permission to observe enough spaces, we were able to describe what was going on these dimensions and synthesize them into what I'm going to call a pedagogic regime. I'm calling it a regime, again, to return to the fact that I believe strongly that there is a very strong influence of the institutional context in which the teacher works, which more or less narrows down the options that are available to teachers. So pretty much in a given school, you will find that teachers tend to be of a certain kind, or that pedagogy tends to take place in a certain way. While I say on the one hand that the government school space was the only space in which teachers emerged as individuals, it's also a school space which was marked by a kind of a laissez-faire pedagogy, where you could find laissez-faire pedagogic regime in which you would have some excellent teachers doing some amazing pedagogy, which is really of very high quality, all in the vernacular, and other teachers whose relationship was completely massified. And they were focused on just domesticating the children and making sure that they stayed quiet in the classroom and were under control. So that's a very complex, different kind of space, where in fact you find bizarre variations within the same institutional space. But by and large, otherwise, in these schools in Hyderabad, there was a lot of homogenization that was going on. I found broadly 7 types of pedagogies. This was the domesticating kind of pedagogy, where the focus of the pedagogy was just to keep the children quiet and just make them learn A, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's all the kids did for a lot of the time. Even when they went into the higher class and some of them had become literate, they were basically just being schooled to be quiet. And the authority of this school came from the teacher. It was emanating out of the teacher. It was the teacher who was deciding the standards, or the school principal who was deciding the expectations. This range of pedagogies were all types of textbook cultures, and I will just come back to this in a little bit of detail. This seemed to be progressive, but it was progressive because it worked in schools where there was a lot of cultural capital coming in from children, and the teachers were able to draw upon it. But even in these schools, the effort of the teachers to make the children learn was very, very distinctive. So there was all the time this obsession that we have to make sure that children have learnt. And what is it that children have to have learnt? Well, there are some questions for which they need to know the answers. So it was repeatedly coming back to that kind of a measure. This is something which is so distinctively Andhra, which is the coaching or the SWAT school type of pedagogic culture, in which the schools sold themselves as not only schools that would enable children to crack various medical and engineering entrance tests. So that was actually a part of the promotional material of the school, that the children were cracking these examinations. Even though the school was up to 10th, they followed the children who had gone on to class 12 and reported their ranks in the MSET examination. So the school was directly claiming an ability to crack various entrance exams. I'll just come back to mapping these pedagogic regimes which I found onto the types of schools that existed, the clientele that children went to. Well, not surprisingly, many of the upper income group we find more progressive pedagogy perhaps. That is at least where you will find some dialogue in the classroom. And the teacher may insist on the textbook answer, but she will allow the child to write it in her own words. So that's the extent to which the pedagogy may be considered progressive in the Indian context. You still have to write the answers of the textbook, you just get some leeway to write it in your own words. And it's dialogic to the extent that you can ask questions in classroom and ask for clarifications. But the need to ensure that children will be able to do examinations is nevertheless very much there in the culture of the school. The other schools which were progressive are some of the schools which cater to the lowest group. I mentioned to you earlier that in some government schools we found some remarkable pedagogic practice, and also in some of the schools that cater to the rag pickers groups. These were really private, unrecognized schools with actually religious backing. So one of them was a Hindutva school and one was a madrasa. But they were both very supportive of the child's holistic development. In other words, these were the only schools in which we actually found an interest in children participating in songs, a kind of a very positive relationship of the teachers with the home. I mean, unexpected. These are the two religious fundamentalist groups, Hindutva one, Muslim one, and they are the schools where you find progressive pedagogy. But what's the hidden story here? It's in the vernacular. It's not in English. And so the possibility of conversations which are not structured and bound by the need to conduct conversation in English seem to have opened up the possibility that the interactions of that pedagogic space will be much more enriching. But otherwise, by and large, the schools were English medium schools, other than the government schools. And to a great extent, the pedagogies of these schools were very, very stultified. Now, what is the variation? I told you PR1 is domesticating. So what about 2, 3, and 4? What are the differences that you see in that? In 2, you have to get the answer right according to what the teacher said was the answer. The answer was right. In PR3, you have to get the answer right, but it's a textbook answer that you are referred to. And what's PR4? You have to get the answer right, but there will be a possibility that you can write it in your own words, so it's slightly more progressive. Well, interestingly, there's an obsession with conceptual development in these schools. So they want teachers who are highly competent in the disciplines to do this teaching, because if they have good content knowledge, as you were saying, they're much better to enable children to learn concepts better. But then why are you learning the concepts? So that you can crack the entrance exams, you can crack the engineering exams, you can crack the IIT exams, because there's a more conceptual bend to it. So it's kind of a little ironical that there is a conceptual development interest, but it's closely tied to the examination and the competitive exam domain. And so in almost every type of school, you can see that there is a certain approach to the centrality of these question answers that have to be learned and these exams that have to be cracked, which informs what is going on in the schools. So this is what I'm calling is an assessment culture of our society. And I feel that whatever assessments that we are doing, they are actually a part of this culture in which our school system seems to be. It's not that we're bringing assessment discussions into a school space which had poor assessment or didn't have assessment. We're talking about bringing assessment into a schooling space which is actually obsessed with examinations and obsessed with tests. And I think it's important for us to take this discussion in terms of thinking about what the interaction of this is. I know that the quality of the existing examinations, we may argue, is very poor. So what are you being tested on? They're not good tests. They're the rote memory based tests, perhaps. They're the back of the book kind of tests. And I know friends who argue, and even in international theory, there's always been the possibility that if the assessment test got better, perhaps the pedagogy of the school would improve. So can't we have assessment-led reform of the schooling space? But you can see that you may have conceptually based assessment tests, like in the Olympiad exams, which are really very, very rich conceptual and cognitive experiences for children, but they can nevertheless produce a kind of pedagogy in the school which can be very stultifying and structured and extremely high stakes. And that's really what we seem to be seeing in the school. I thought I'll just end this this presentation with just speaking about what I feel is the problem with, it's not a problem with assessment, but I think it's a problem with what we regard learning in the Indian context. And assessment, there is no imagination of learning which is not linked to assessment. Now, even those of us who are teachers in classrooms, we know that a lot of our assessment of learning happens in the course of teaching itself. So we rarely need separate events where we assess children. Through the act of teaching and interaction, we often have multiple opportunities to understand where children are. In fact, many of the assessment items are also very good pedagogic tasks for us to do collaboratively. So there's no need for them to be specifically in the domain of assessment and not just come more broadly into the domain of teaching and learning. So I think that I do agree that the distinction between assessment and learning is very tenuous. But in the Indian context, it seems that being measured is really what seems to be the focus of the learning efforts of teachers and the learning efforts of children itself. And the possibility that there is something like understanding, that there may be something like problem solving, that they may be learning for something larger, out of which assessment captures something, doesn't seem to be available. In fact, what we seem to be seeing all the time in the schools is that the entire effort of learning is actually getting reduced all the time. Just imagine if a whole lesson can be taught in 10 minutes. And everything that you do after that is to revise the question answers. Or the entire lesson will be taught in 20 minutes. And then the rest of the time will all be spent in learning the question answers. So that is really the dominant imagination with which learning is planned and executed. So in this kind of context, I wonder what are the possibilities which more intelligent assessment can actually open up and make available in an Indian schooling system of this kind.